Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining an SMPS Pivot and Focus Learning Lab. Today's webinar will address how to be a pro troublemaker who leads through uncertainty. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. On the right side of your screen, you will see the GoToWebinar sidebar. You can click on the orange arrow to expand or minimize the side panel. Questions are encouraged and will be addressed throughout today's presentation as well as at the end. So please feel free to type your question into the question box and click send to submit. As a reminder, CPSMs attending this live program will automatically receive one CEU added to their online transcript. And finally, today's program is being recorded and will be posted for SMPS members within the Marketing Resource Center at mysmps.org. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for a Pivot and Focus Learning Lab. Today's program will address how to be a pro troublemaker who leads through uncertainty. Stefanie Krievins provides change management training and coaching to privately held companies who want to make a difference, create a culture where people want to work, and to serve their customers with joy and innovation. Stefanie shows leaders how to break what doesn't work anymore so they can build real change with their people and for their company. Welcome to the program, Stefanie. The audience is all yours.
All right, hot dog. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you today so we can talk about my favorite topic, which is pro troublemaking, and how you can be more of a pro troublemaker in your organization. So let's dig in. I'm going to assume everybody can see the slide. Technically, everything, or the slide deck, everything is good on my end, but feel free to bring up in chat if something is not working for you. But I do want to invite you to use that chat throughout our time together. If you have a question, if I don't see it, I'm going to ask Matthew to help me curate it and be like, hey, Stefanie, pay attention to that question. And I will answer those on the fly, or we will also have time at the end to answer questions. So either one is fine with me. I love to make these more of a conversation than just a one-way presentation. And so I see all these awesome attendees coming in. You guys, friends, we're supposed to have almost 200 of us on this call today to talk about pro troublemaking and change making. How great is that? So as we're just giving folks just a few minutes to get into the room, I want to invite you to get out a pen and some paper to write on, because I'm going to have you do some exercises as we go through this to hopefully help in your learning so that you can take more of these lessons learned today back to your team and your organization. All right, let us roll, my friends. And I'm going to leave my camera on because I do want you to see my face, just to make this a bit more personal. So I'm going to share with you a little bit more about my background, bring that bio to life that Matthew shared for you. And I do want to hear from you as well. I want to know who is on this call today, and I'll have you use chat in just a minute. We're going to talk about why a culture in a team need pro troublemakers, especially after a year called 2020, which was the ultimate hot mess, right? Why do we need people who can sustain change with focus and resilience? I'll tell you why. We're going to talk about how to be a positive change maker, not the devil's advocate. No one likes working with the devil's advocate, but it seems that's kind of the only tool we have in our toolbox sometimes. I'm going to share with you some other ways of being a change maker and having your colleagues actually want to work with you, which I think is the secret sauce. And then we're going to talk about, to help you better understand what kind of pro troublemaker you can be, I'm going to provide a tool for you that helps you understand what's your need for speed for change. Because part of the thing that slows change down in organizations, which stops the change that you're hoping to make happen, is we all have a different internal, I call it a biological clock. I don't know what other words to use there, but it relates to our need for speed for change. And then I'm going to share with you a tool that you can use to make it more likely that you can influence your colleagues to advance that change that you're seeking, whatever it is, right? Like, we have seen monumental change over the past year because of the global pandemic, because of the rising equity conversations in our workplaces and in our businesses. That's great. But friends, we got to be in it for the long haul. And I'll show you what I mean by that here in just a second. In order to drive change, step one of actually creating sustainable change, whatever that means for individuals, for teams, for businesses, for an entire industry, step one is creating an urgency for change. The global pandemic created massive amounts of urgency for change in a very short amount of time. Do you, as a leader, know how to create that same kind of urgency for change when there isn't a global pandemic? I'm going to show you a few tools that you can use to do that today, because my guess is you're here because you want to learn, you want to grow, you want to do new things, and you want new results. In order for that to happen, you're going to have to be able to sustain evolution, iterations, agility, resilience, so that you can get new business results. And in order to do that, you as a leader have to know how to guide people through change. So we'll touch on that today. All right, so before you hear from me, I want to see in chat, just give me a sense of who's on this call today. What's your title? Where are you from? Where are you at physically? I'm here in Indianapolis, Indiana. I know SMPS headquarters is in the DC area, but I'd love to know in the chat who's here. So title, maybe how many people you supervise if you do at all, and then where are you physically located? I would just love to hear from everybody else here.
Definitely
Folks
looks like we
can,
have a lot of marketing directors, some senior
okay,
marketing coordinators, some business development managers, some marketing managers, business development leads, some proposal managers. Yeah, a lot of BD and marketing leaders have decided to join us today.
all right, fantastic. And I'll tell you what, Matthew, I cannot see the chat. Is there a reason why?
It looks
I
like a
don't
lot
see
of
the
these are coming through the questions box. That's why.
God, oh, questions box. I don't have that option. Okay, well, Matthew, I'll need you to be my curator then as we move forward. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Absolutely. Mhm.
All right, good to know. Things you learn, my friends, all the things to learn about Zoom and ReCentral and GoToWebinar, all the ways for us to connect virtually. All right, so that's our agenda today. I want to share with you a little bit about my perspective on the world, who I help, how I help, because I think this will help you better understand the tools that I'm going to share with you. So here's what I currently get to do in my career. I get to fix hot messes and create pro troublemakers. So I work with CEOs, managing directors, and their mid-level leaders who have hardworking teams but might lack creative problem-solving skills, who might not know how to address conflict in the right kind of way so that they can grow their company, who have rock stars who have stalled out because of stress and burnout and overwhelm, and they don't know how to get them back on track. And that might be you, that might be a member of your team. But I get to work with folks like that who are ambitious, who want to grow, who want to do new things, but life just trips us up sometimes, or business problems just trip us up sometimes. And so I offer executive and team coaching programs to help folks achieve the business results and the team results that they actually want to see. Um, I come by way of this work very honestly. So I have a master's degree in nonprofit management. My first job out of school, I was a marketing director for Catholic Charities in the Archdiocese of Indianapolis, and I was the first person to ever have the job. And I took all the fun parts of a lot of administrative assistants' jobs away from them. Boy, did they not like me. And so in that first job out of school, I learned all the ways to not create change in organizations. I was the devil's advocate. I was the know-it-all. I was the nope, we have to have rules and processes for everything as a way to create control, because I was trying to implement my boss's vision for marketing across only 39 counties and 6 different agencies. So I kind of had 7 bosses on a good day, but I was trying to implement a consistent marketing vision, and I couldn't get people to go along with me. And it probably took me a good 3 years and some really hard feedback where my colleague came to me and said, Stephanie, here's the deal. You're super smart. You know what you're doing, no doubt. But people don't like to work with you. They think you're difficult to work with. Ouch, right? Ouch, who wants to hear that? But it was a blessing, because then I was able to find more influence skills to communicate with volunteers and staff to be more effective, to make it more likely that they would want to change with me. And so once I learned those skills, which I call pro troublemaking, things went a lot more smoothly. I got much better feedback. People actually wanted to work for me or work with me. So they called me to help them out, which was great, which meant I get to implement the vision that my boss was seeking for marketing in the Archdiocese. So I share these skills with you because I've been both the troublemaker and I've been the pro troublemaker. And I know that on the pro troublemaking side, it's much more effective. So hot messes, what are they? We know a good one. We'll call it 2020, but it's when problems are complex, foggy, icky, especially when there's conflict involved, right? You're just like, oh, I don't know what to do with that. I'm not going to touch it. Or they're volatile. So just every day seems up and down, up and down. One day it's great. The next day it's gone to hell in the handbasket. We don't know what to do with it, right? For those of you who are into business jargon, it's technically the word is VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It was coined about 15 years ago, if I have my facts straight there, and it has only continued to escalate since then. By all accounts, friends, if you've read into the research yet, what the research is saying right now is that because of what happened last year, technology evolution, the speed of adoption or the rate of adoption, the evolution of the tech itself and how people interact with it has leapfrogged by 10 years in less than a year because of what we went through over the course of the pandemic. That's amazing to think about. That creates a lot of stress. And I know so many of you have lived through that stress, both good stress and bad stress. But that is the result of the hot mess that we have gone through over the past years, that we have leapfrogged technology by a decade, which has amazing opportunity and stresses people out, which I know you experience either from yourself or from your colleagues. So I want to share with you my thoughts and perspectives on different ways of approaching these rapid changes that are more productive, less stressful, and brings people together for better collaboration. So I want to hear from you before I take the floor for a moment and share with you what I've learned about resilience, focus, nimbleness, adaptability, pro troublemaking. What was the most surprising for you to learn about your team in 2020? Both good or bad? How did they surprise you? And some things that I've been hearing lately is I'm so proud of the way they stepped up, or they've let the stress get the best of them and they're just starting to shut down, and it's showing in their work by missing deadlines. There's no one right or wrong answer, but what surprised you about your team in 2020?
All right, so we're seeing a couple responses come through. One says
Hmm.
really willing to help each other. The team
Mm,
has really adapted to using Microsoft Teams. The importance of managerial skills in the remote work. Um,
yes.
we learned that we absolutely can work remotely. Um, just how well working remotely has helped productivity for the team.
Mm, mm,
Um, a lot about flexibility and adaptability that has been quite common through some of these responses.
mm-hmm.
Um, we're seeing um, just how folks are just going with the flow, just going with the
Yeah.
flow as things come through, uh, and how important saving commuting time has been.
Yes,
A lot of good
absolutely,
responses.
absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Super helpful. Thank you. That's really great context for me to guide the rest of this conversation. And so, one thing I'd love to hear from you all at the end, not right now, but especially in marketing, the research that I'm seeing is that this work from home is increasing productivity, but it's decreasing creativity on teams. And so, love your all's insight at the end if we have time to dig into that. Um, all right, so super helpful. So, friends, 2021 is here, right? Like so many people were excited for it to be here, thinking something magical was going to happen at 12:01 a.m. January 1st, 2021. And not to bust your bubble, but nothing magic happens because the date changes. Magic happens when we change our behavior. And I think part of why people thought, oh, when 2021 gets here, it'll be a fresh start, it'll be something new. That can certainly be true, but the reality is that a disaster like a global pandemic, which obviously had economic ramifications, health ramifications, social ramifications, it touched so many different parts of our lives so rapidly, right? Basically, in 10 weeks, everything kind of imploded when it came to COVID-19. And so the rationale is like, oh, basically it kind of shut everything else down. We figured it out in a new way over the course of about 10 weeks. So hopefully, we'll just need about another solid, focused 10 weeks to come out of it. And unfortunately, that's not how disasters happen. So also at Catholic Charities, I never thought I'd use these lessons learned again, but here we are. I had the good fortune of doing Hurricane Katrina relief work, actually recovery work, which I'll tell you about the difference here in a minute. When a tornado wiped out an entire town in southern Indiana, I helped rebuild that community with several other stakeholder groups. And then when a flood overtook an entire town in Indiana in our archdiocese, I also helped that. So I've had the good fortune to walk alongside people as they rebuild their lives, their communities, and their businesses after such a horrific disaster. Now, COVID-19 was kind of like the slow moving hurricane, right, on our culture. Like it kind of came in kind of slow. It released some really violent repercussions and then is slowly moving out. And so here's what happens with any kind of disaster. This is true for the recession in 2008. This is true, but on a longer time frame with the dot-com bust. This is true with the economic, social, and political ramifications of 9/11. The timelines kind of vary, but what we know now, what we think we know, right? What do we know for sure at this point? Very little. What we think we know now is that the economic and social recovery from COVID-19 will last into 2022 and possibly another year longer. So when it comes to disasters, if you think about Hurricane Katrina back in 2005 and any major hurricane disaster, the Red Cross gets a ton of press and positive street cred, as they should, for what they're able to mobilize and do as soon as that storm physically rolls out. They've got people on the ground distributing water, food, stabilizing buildings, finding those who perished in the disaster, finding those who are hurt and need medical help, right? That's great. Friends, the Red Cross is in a place like New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina for 2 to 6 weeks. That's it. That is not what brings a community back to life. It is those who are in the recovery mode for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, rebuilding homes, rebuilding businesses, getting people back into the community, creating a functioning community. And so part of the reason that this seems to be dragging on and on and on is one, you need education on how disasters work. That's why I'm here today. But then two, unfortunately, large catastrophic events take a long time to rebuild. And so where we were in January 2020, see, I'm already just trying to wipe 2020 out of my memory, but where we were in January 2020, well, let me back up because that's not fair because we had awareness of the disease. Let's say summer 2019, right? When really no one knew what was coming and what to expect besides some very niche world public health experts, right? This has been on the horizon for decades, actually, but was it on our horizon? Heck no, it wasn't. So summer 2019, you're probably in the phase as a business leader of making sure you have the right insurance for maybe some business interruption, interruption or libel or some type of political or sorry, some type of potential lawsuit related to your work, right? You might even have been thinking that point about active shooter drills that might happen on your campus, unfortunately. Fire drills, tornado drills. You are in the mitigation phase, which is making plans to practice your plans. That's a great place to be. There's calm, there's stability, you're present, you have low stress for a disaster because you're not in the middle of it. That's great. Step two is then preparedness, which is practicing your planning. That is doing an active shooter drill. That is stress testing your IT to see, oh, what would happen if we had to send everyone home within 24 hours to work from home, right? Raise your hand if you actually stress tested your IT to make that happen. Few companies did, very few did, until you moved into the actual response mode, which here in Indiana, I will tell you, it unfolded between March 13th and March 16th is basically when in Indianapolis, all of our employers that could sent their people home. So the response mode is you are actively responding to an emergency situation. So that's when probably as a leader, you were communicating daily, if not multiple times a day with your stakeholders. That's when you were making rapid fire decisions based on what we knew at that time and what was unfolding. Very stressful, right? And you saw a variety of emotional reactions from your people. Now, for the past, I did want to say that we were transitioning into recovery mode, which is that rebuilding mode, but with numbers continuing to skyrocket and the vaccine not being available to the vast majority of the public, I'm going to make the argument that we're somewhat still in the response mode, because we still have to be on the lookout for um, over using too much of our healthcare system because of the response, ventilator management, PPE management, those kinds of things. But large sections of the population are moving into recovery. We're thinking about long-term plans. We can make slower, better decisions. And what I want to encourage you to think about in recovery is, one, it's long, it's hard. We're going to have to continue to work hard through the next 2 years to bring about an evolution of what society will look like. I personally detest the words next normal and new normal. I don't know what those mean. Everything is always an evolution, always. And that's what we're in the middle of, is an evolution. Um, and so recovery is much longer than we want it to be, which is why we as leaders need to have resilience, why we need our teammates to have resilience to see this through, to continue to make the hard decisions. What the opportunity that you have in front of you right now is to look at what got broken and what strengths were really highlighted during the response phase that you can now fix in the recovery phase, so that when we go back into mitigation, when we go back into a more peaceful, less stressful, more calm time, you will have a stronger business. And I trust that you've probably already made progress on some of those, but that's what this time is for now, is to realize what was broken about our business model, our team, our culture, our technology, our assumptions. What can we fix now to build an even stronger business? So I say this to you all just to say, if this feels like it's dragging out longer than you thought it should or would, this is the natural order of things. It just is. An economic public health disaster that wreaked havoc directly and violently for 10 weeks. Like when we were really all like stuck at home, when we shouldn't have even gone to the grocery store, more than once a week, once every other week. That's what I'm talking about. That last spring where we were really all unsure about what was happening, when it would happen, how we would come out of it. And we've kind of been slowly creeping out of it. But now is the time to look forward in 2021 to see possibilities and rebuild your team, your culture, your methodologies to create what you truly want. So that's what we got going on. Friends, here I believe is what the leader that we need now more than ever, and that's that pro troublemaker. So I want to introduce you to the troublemaker that you probably already know and probably have been, the devil's advocate, that person that in the meeting when you present an idea, they're the first one to tell you all the reasons it won't work, all the assumptions that you made that were wrong. Their intent is to actually help you polish that idea to make it as perfect as possible. What it comes across as, you don't know what the heck you're doing, right? Not an effective way to communicate. Troublemakers are reactive. They complain a lot. They're me focused. They're frustrated and frustrating, if we're being honest. They have that negative Nancy kind of pessimism. And my apologies to any Nancy's out there in the crowd or Debbie Downers. But it's a label we use. So negative Nancy pessimism. They're the folks that just kind of break the rules because they can, or they use rules to control people. Again, I just confessed, I've been there, done that. They're alienating and exhausting. They're the person that when they walk into the staff meeting, you're like, oh, or show up on the Zoom call at the staff meeting, you're like, couldn't she have taken a sick day today? Why she got to be here with us? They tell you all the things that aren't working, they're controlling, or they're too chaotic. It's actually two sides of the same coin. I work with a leader who has 3 new ideas every single day, and his organization has about 35 employees, and I don't know what the heck they're doing. And they're clients of mine. I'm trying to help them out. But he runs an extremely chaotic ship. Now, I will say they've been extremely successful in part because of the chaos, but could they be even more successful if they had more focus? Heck yeah, they could. And so troublemakers are also get into analysis paralysis or frenetic overdrive, which is more my style. I'm a fast-paced, high-energy person. And so I will try to do way too much because I'm overly ambitious. And so troublemakers can both kind of shut down with stress, but they can also just go into overdrive and like, guys, we have to deal with this now. We have to deal with this now. And everything is urgent and important all the time. Whew, they're exhausting. They're exhausting themselves. They're exhausting you. Pro troublemakers are in some ways very different from that. In some ways, an extension of the other side. So pro troublemakers, they name the possibilities. When you give them a problem, they're like, oh, wonder what we can do with this. There's so many opportunities here. And you know why? As I've been digging into the data, something super fun has emerged. So half of the Fortune 500 companies that we have now were founded during economic downturns. That's how much opportunity exists when things are going off the rails. Pro troublemakers are proactive, so they're looking ahead. They're creative, they're curious. They ask more questions than make statements. They keep their eye on that big prize, right? Like, why are we here? What's the deep work that we're really here to do? It's not about getting out the next newsletter. It's not about filling out that content calendar. You do those things to serve something bigger than yourselves and something impactful in this world. Pro troublemakers are optimistic, sunshiny. They love a lot of glitter, right? They know how to bend the rules or change the rules as needed. So all rules can be bent a little bit until in order to kind of stress test them to know whether or not they still work or applicable. Pro troublemakers seek permission to do that or do that with a joyful spirit. Pro troublemakers, you actually want to be around them because they're so passionate. They're so excited about what they're doing. They're the person that when they pop onto the Zoom room, they got a smile on their face. They're excited to be there. And they're going to help the team remember what's important, what's possible. They're the folks that are like, oh, I'm so glad she added that insight to this conversation. It just makes the project so much better, right? They're focused and they're resilient, which I think are 2 key skills that are especially applicable right now. Because as so many opportunities emerge in our businesses, we've got to remember our mission, our vision, and our values for the organization as a filter to stay focused on what's truly important now. And then they're resilient. So resilient leaders, I happen to have this in front of me, are like slinkies. They can stretch, they can grow, they can flex, they can be uncomfortable, and they come back together in one piece. That's what business resilience is, and that's what we need our leaders to be right now. Too many people, especially last year, stretched and almost broke themselves from a mental health perspective. They ran out of ideas because they weren't taking care of themselves, or they got themselves knotted in such a stressful thing that they don't know how to relax and be themselves and go back to being creative. So friends, this is the pro troublemaking way. This is what I invite you into today. These are the skills that you need in order to make positive change happen in the long term with people and with people who actually want to work with you. That's the secret, my friend. All right, so why do we need more pro troublemakers in our organization? So disengagement is only going to continue to rise. These numbers have been sad for the past decade. I'm talking 70% disengagement, which means 70% of your payroll is either actively not working for you or actively working against you. That's scary to think about, right? So with with the continued economic recovery, people are going to continue to disengage without some intentionality, without something bigger and more purposeful than themselves to connect with. Innovation happens faster when you can iterate faster. When you iterate, you can iterate faster when you have more trust on your team. So when folks feel free to speak up and say, hey, I don't think that's going to work, or hey, could we tweak it this way to make it more effective? People are willing to be that kind of People are willing to have that kind of workplace vulnerability because they trust other people, because it's safe to bring that stuff up. It's safe to criticize the idea. It's safe to say, hey guys, I don't think we have it all figured out here. I think we need some more skills on the team, or I think we need another $10,000 to really pull this off, or the assumptions we made about how these types of posts would land with our target audience, they're just not holding up. We need to switch perspectives. And you can do that when you trust each other, and you can do it faster the more trust that you have. We need more pro troublemakers in our organization, especially with focused adaptability and resilience, because as you know, no plan ever goes according to plan. So pro troublemakers can adapt more quickly. And if you want new results, you're going to have to get new behaviors from your people. New behaviors come from those who are willing to flex, who are willing to speak up, who are willing to kind of detach themselves from the work in a healthy way while staying engaged with it. But they're willing to say, hey, like the goal is the most important thing. I'm willing to flex what we're doing to get there in order to make that happen. I'm committed to the goal. I'm not committed to the strategy or the tactics to get there. So that's why we need more pro troublemakers, because I do believe positive change making agents can do all of this more quickly, more nimbly with people around them. So, as you know, as you've experienced, all change creates conflict. And not all conflict is bad at all. In fact, there's three types of conflict. There's artificial harmony, which is actually the lack of conflict. On the opposite end, there's aggression. There is personal attacks of people. That's kind of that conflict that you think of when you think of a really abrasive leader who maybe yells, screams, pounds their fists on the table. That actually works at some cultures, but not in the long term. But what we need is more healthy conflict in our organizations, people who can manage their emotions, manage their energy, show up in effective ways in order to criticize projects, not people. And so I believe strongly that people that are positive change makers understand how to embrace healthy conflict, which means creating more of it so that you can have better results. And they're willing to dig into that and do that with other people, not evade it, not walk away from it, not be too passive, but also not be too aggressive. Um, People who are comfortable with healthy conflict are assertive in all of the best ways. And so, as you've experienced over this past year, as all of your 2020 plans probably went out the window in Q2, is that as you all went forward, as you all moved forward together, you probably came to see how maybe your expectations, you didn't communicate them as clearly as you should have, or how other people had expectations of you that they never articulated until you didn't meet them, right? And so we need pro troublemakers who can spend more time creating alignment before we move our team into execution, who can better understand that there are so many different obstacles and types of change that they have the education to actually understand how change unfolds in an organization, and they can make it happen. So there's some education, there's some team awareness, there's some self-awareness that a pro troublemaker has, and makes working with them more effective, which means that it makes it more likely that change will happen in the organization. Now, I say all that to say the global pandemic forced a lot of change that we didn't have a lot of time to think about. I don't know if that's good or bad for your organization. And you may not know if that's good or bad yet in the long term. But as a leader, you need to understand how to create that kind of change when there isn't a global pandemic, or there isn't a massive cultural social uprising that your business must now respond to. You need to have these skills in place regardless of the external environment around you. So pardon me, my friends. Matthew, just checking in. Are there any questions that folks have as I take a sip of water here? Anything, folks, feel free to put in that question functionality. Any questions based on what we talked about so far?
So far, no questions have come through, but once they do, I will make sure to let you know.
All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. So you've probably seen a variety of emotional responses from your people over this past year. And I just want to help name and label them for you in the spirit of like, oh, now I see what that is. Because the reasons that people resist change require different tools from you as a leader. The stress response is one, right? So people resist change because part of their stress response might be just to shut down. I was doing a training about typical ways that we respond to stress way back in April with an IT team. And I had a couple people on that team admit with their boss in the room that they weren't that stressed out. And it's because they were actually under functioning. They had shut down as a way. Like, I don't understand how you could be an essential employee guiding a manufacturing company that's making ventilator parts during a national health crisis and not have some kind of stress response. That doesn't seem humanly possible to me. And I'm not trying to judge them at all. Please don't take it that way. But when you are a critical piece of a company trying to design and deliver and manufacture ventilator parts during a public health emergency, I would think that might have some kind of reaction from you. And they were terminated a couple weeks later because they were not pulling their weight. But that can be an actual stress response is not stressing out at all. Now there's good stress and bad stress. I want folks to have more good stress. But the opposite end of not reacting is overreacting, which I'm sure you saw in your team too. So the reason people resist change could be one of those two stress responses. The reason people resist change is because of their personality and behavioral style. So their Myers-Briggs, their DISC style, their predictive index style. Those all have very different ways of responding and reacting to stress. So for me, I'm a high I style on DISC, which stands for high influence, which means I love variety, which means I'm an extrovert, which means my stress response is to try all the new ideas. I was telling Matthew one of my stress responses during quarantine was to start 15 house projects, in part because I was bored, but in part, the way I solve problems is I just start throwing spaghetti at the wall. That's my stress response. So my opportunity for myself during that of course I realized in August when half of my list was halfway done, was that, oh, maybe my stress response could be focused in a little bit. Some of the reasons that people resist change is because of their internal clock, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, their value set. So if your personal values are high on stability, steadiness, safety, you're probably going to resist change a little bit more than someone who values freedom, flexibility, trying new things, variety. These are not good or bad. These are just pieces that make us human. We might resist change because of where we're at in life. I was talking to a CIO yesterday who said, you know what, I realized during this pandemic that I don't want to take as many risks as I did in my 20s. I'm going to make a whole different set of choices about my career and my work because I'm in a different place in life, and that's okay. Sometimes we resist change because of competing commitments, which is a deep down we believe that the change violates some deep down held values for us. And so sometimes we resist change because we don't yet have enough information about how it could create alignment with that within us versus that tension. Sometimes people resist change because they're just not dissatisfied with it. They're just not as upset about the problem as you are. They don't understand the broader context like you do. And so here's what this looks like. I worked with a nonprofit out of Des Moines, Iowa, actually, and case managers had a lot of paperwork to fill out to get their clients help, and they had asked the accounting team to help them either create a more technologically advanced process so they didn't have to put someone's name 15 times on 15 different forms, or to help them with a lot of this paperwork. And what ultimately the accounting team said no. You know why? Because they weren't dissatisfied with it. They didn't want to change. They didn't want more work. They thought they could help in other ways, and that help wasn't helpful. And you know who was terminated a year later? Almost the entire accounting team, because they refused to help, because they weren't dissatisfied with the current status quo, so they didn't want to change their behavior. Our brains are actually wired for safety. So, friends, a little neurological bits of wisdom here. Our brains are not wired to try new things. Now, you might be that way as a human being, but that's because you've taught yourself other ways of living in this world. Our brains are designed to connect us with other human beings to keep us safe. Think about how humans evolved. Humans evolved working 3 hours a day, mostly sitting around in communion with other human beings. And if you got separated from your humans, it meant almost certain death because of the dangers of the world, of the globe, eons ago. So our brains are wired for that environment living in 2021. And so our brains, until you learn to short circuit yourself, think that change equals unsafe. Disconnection from other human beings equals unsafe. Doesn't make it true now, but that is the neurological synapses. The neurons that are firing in our brain are telling us disconnection from humans is unsafe. Disconnection from home base is unsafe and probably means death pretty soon. Super dramatic. You don't know what's going on until you dig into the research, but that is what's happening. So when people get isolated from other human beings, that's why we move into such a bad mental state, is because our brain is telling us, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. It's pretty morbid, and it's pretty sad too when you think about humans that are isolated from other human beings, what they're going through. And sometimes the reason people resist change has to do with your leadership, because you have not communicated enough about the context or the reason. So I want to share with you a tool that you can use in that case. But I know as leaders, you spend a lot of time planning for change, talking about change with the right decision makers, and then you go to unveil it with the rest of your team, and you don't understand why they're not getting on board because you sent an email and you had a meeting about it. You got to do much more than that. And I'll share with you something that you can do here at the end. But as leaders, I know you've spent a lot of time working on helping a change unfold, and you need people to get on board quickly. You're going to have to do more communicating in order to make that happen. I wish I could make it easier for you, but this is just how it goes. All right. So I must share this quote with you all today, my friends. For those on your team or even yourself that are like, oh, when things get back to normal, when, the world looks like it did in the summer of 2019, then we can be successful. Then we can have a new strategic plan. Then we can do this. Friends, it's not coming. Here's the reality. Our circumstances are not the reason we cannot succeed. They are the circumstances in which we must succeed. We must accept today for what it is and find solutions to today's problems in order to move forward. This is my friend. She doesn't know me yet, but I love her. Her name's Cy Wakeman. If you don't follow her on LinkedIn, I'd really encourage you to do so. But this quote to me is it needs to be our mantra moving forward, in my opinion, because we cannot continue to blame our external environment for why we can't be successful. It is the reason we must be successful. All right. So, first tool I'm going to share with you, my friends, this is called a meta program for change. This is our need for speed for change or lack thereof. This is going to, I'm going to bust a myth about change for you here in a second, but I want you to get out your note paper. So, a meta program is a lens that our brain uses to make sense of the world. So, at any given moment, and this is a coaching tool, so we use this a lot in coaching. But at any given moment, our brains are actually taking in about 5 billion bits of data from what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell, and all the variations of all of that, right? So I have a painted wall in front of me, and that paint is not one monolithic color. Every single square inch has a different bit of data that's coming into my brain. In order for our brains to make sense of the world, to critically think, to not become overwhelmed with all that information, because turns out we're not computers, shocking, there's a chemical reaction that's happening in our brain that creates these lenses that helps us make sense of the world. It's called a meta program. There's over 100 different meta programs, but this one relates to change for us, and it's our need for speed for change. So here's what I want to ask you. It's an awkward question on purpose. It will help us understand your need for speed for change. All right, so real quick, write this down. Don't think about it, don't judge it, nothing. Just write down your most intuitive response as it relates to your personal goals, so those things that you have full control over. What is your relationship between your most important goals this year and last year? It's an awkward question on purpose. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Write down your response. For your personal goals, what is the relationship between your most important goals this year and last year?
Stephanie, would you like me to read off some of these responses?
No, not yet. Thank you, though.
Okay.
Yep, give me just a hot second. All right, so thank you for sharing those in the chat there. So this helps reveal your need for stability, your need for change. So on the right-hand side, there are folks who truly desire sameness for most of their life. They prefer a routine job. They're not very adaptive to change. They're dependable for that follow through if the work remains stable. They're the folks that are looking to keep a job for 10 or more years. So if you work with a lot of engineers, you might have a lot of these folks here, more analytical skill set, or accountants. This is a good friend of mine. I love him to death. And he's an engineer, actually. He hated his job after 5 years and started looking for a new one 3 years later because he values sameness more than he valued liking his job. And he found a new job another 2 years later. When people say, you know, you've heard the cliche, people don't like to change. It's actually only true for about 5 to 10% of the North American population. So for 10%, at most, for 10% of us, that is true. But to categorize people as saying people don't like change, simply not true, because you see that other 65 and 25%, most people actually either love change and are willing to adapt to it. They just need more information. So on the opposite end of my engineering friend is the difference with change folks. These are the folks in line to get the latest, greatest technology. They're early adopters. They're looking for a new assignment or new job every year, year and a half. They love newness for newness sake. So in my personal life, in case you haven't picked up on it yet, this is me. I change out my shower curtain once a year because I want to look at a new shower curtain. I change up certain pieces of my work here at the company that I own because I love newness. Now I have to contain it a little bit to run a successful company, and I have enough self-awareness now to do that, but I love change for change's sake. That is all there is to it. Most of my friends here, you will be in the sameness with development camp. You are willing to evolve, you're willing to change, but you need to understand the context behind, okay, so what's going to be different? What's going to be better because we do this? You're adaptive to change, but you need to understand the context. You're going to be dependable for it, but you need a few things to change along the way, not the whole throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So in my company right now, I am switching out team members, accountants, bookkeepers, and a CRM. That's how I roll. That's what I do, right? And so, but most folks, probably in a better course of action within your team is probably, let's switch out the CRM, and then we'll switch out the email service, and then we'll switch out another platform. For me, I'm like, we're just going to do it all at once, right? But these folks are looking for significant assignment or project changes every 3 to 7 years. That's most North Americans. So, Matthew, I'd love to hear, read me off a few of those, and I will tell you which camp you're most likely in.
All right. We have one of the responses was focus on mental health and well-being for the entire team.
Hmm?
One was authenticity,
Okay.
a work-life balance,
Okay.
and one says indifference.
I'm sorry, what was the last one?
Indifference.
Indifference. Indifference? Like no difference? Just indifference?
Yeah, that was the response. I see another one.
Okay. Okay.
Another individual who they're not interested in setting a goal; they just go with the flow too.
Oh, interesting. Ooh, I'm gonna put that person with difference with change. That's a good one to help me label this here. So friends, I want you to think about when you answer this question, do this on your own time again. Listen to the recording. It's not about the content of the goal per se, it's about the difference between the goal. So for sameness with development, friends, you might be more likely to say something like, you know what, I had a great exercise routine last year. I'm gonna add in more cardio. My difference with change friends would say, you know what, I tried one exercise routine last year. I'm gonna pick up 5 new habits and let go of 3 old ones. My sameness friends are gonna say something like, I'm gonna do the same exercise routine that I did last year. So I want you to think about what's the difference about the goals, not what the goal is per se. That will help reveal your need for stability here. But think about that. Think about how this extends to your team and people's willingness to change or not change. So with my dear friend, the engineer, when his wife wants a new couch, she starts talking about it a year in advance, and then says, all right, I'm going to narrow this down to 2 couches for you to go look at. We'll go look at them, and then I will make the decision with your input. Because if it was up to him, he would never buy a new couch. And in fact, the room that he's responsible for, the man cave, he's had the same couch for 20 years. So I want you to think about, how do you change up your goals or what you're driving towards? That will help you better understand your need for speed for change. All right. So before we get into this tool that you can use as a leader to help influence your people, here's what I want to share with you. And this comes from an article I read on Forbes. This is the ultimate test of your leadership. Sorry, I got to move my box so I can read the whole thing here. This is the ultimate test of your leadership and an opportunity for you to show your employees what you're made of. Hard times are opportunities for us to shine, to learn new skills, to do more of what makes us awesome, and to let go of what doesn't make us awesome. So if you've not yet embraced this as an opportunity, I invite you into that today. And here's a tool that you can use with yourself, with your team, to make change more likely. And you may have seen this, but this is basically what your fellow human beings need in order to get on board with your ideas. And even my sameness friends, they're going to get on board with it. They're going to be some of the last ones to do it. But if you communicate these 4 talking points, you will make it more likely that people will understand the change that you're trying to go after. So here are the 4. So here's the reason people won't change, like deep down, kind of universally, is that their resistance is greater than the pain they're experiencing from not changing. They don't have a positive, compelling vision about what could be different, and they don't understand the clear first steps that it would take to get to the vision. So a lot of times leaders come in and say, this is how we're going to change, and a little bit about why we're going to change, but we don't do a good enough job into digging into what's not working, both at an organizational level, at a team level, and at an individual level. Think back to my accounting team friends and why they didn't change, right? And so our job as leaders is to really understand, okay, why are you resisting that change? So to really dig into that resistance, your job is to ask questions And a technique to use there is the 5 whys. If you've not tried that, well, why is that important to you? Well, why is that stopping you? Well, why does that feel important? Just ask why 5 times. You don't even have to add on the qualifiers at the end. Just ask why 5 times to get to the real reason that people won't change or why they're resisting change, actually. And then your job is to craft messaging around the dissatisfaction. What's not working? Why is a policy that was built 15 years ago not serving the team now? How is it impacting results? How is it impacting relationships? Why is the process broken? Think about it from 7 different perspectives. Ask your team members, what's not working about this for you? And then add on a positive, compelling vision. What could be different? Why is 25% growth in the marketing team so important? Why is converting our proposal development process or proposal delivery process into a digital format going to be a game changer? It must be positive. It doesn't have to be exciting, but it does have to be compelling, right? Like, oh, I want to get on board with that. As a leader, think about how you could ramp up that messaging even more effectively. And then you must articulate the first steps to making that happen. Don't feel the pressure to create a complete plan that's like, here's how we're going to get from A to Z. Just say, guys, here's what A, B, and C is. And then I'm going to get your feedback about what's working, what's not working, and we'll adapt from there. But all I need you to do is A, B, and C right now. Let's get it done. So as leaders, what I find in my coaching is that oftentimes you're missing key talking points. You're missing the R, you're missing the D, or you're missing the V. For some teams, they'll get stuck in the dissatisfaction for so long, they don't know why they're complaining anymore. They're just complaining. They don't know what they're actually working towards. When you ask them, what do you want? What do you want out of this new CRM? They're going to tell you all the things that are broken about the current one. Okay, that's helpful. But what do you want? So when folks tell you what they don't want, what's not working, I want you as a leader who is a coach to say, okay, so what do you want? It's a really quick way to turn the conversation around and get a better sense of where you are headed. And then make sure you articulate those clear first steps so that people can wrap their brain around, all right, what needs to happen next? Because as you know, a lot of projects are just overwhelming. They're complex. They're ambiguous. Oh my gosh, you guys, they're ambiguous. And we don't know where to start, so we just don't start at all. So as their leader, guide them on those first few steps. So friends, this is the magic equation that if someone's going to change and you do a thorough enough job of communicating all 4 of these, you will help them change. Now you can't control whether or not they change or not, but if you can communicate all 4 of these, you will increase your likelihood of success drastically. I don't know if it's 70, 80, 90%. I don't know what those are because I dropped out of stats class, but this is the magic equation to getting people to change, is that the pain of not changing, the vision and the first steps must be greater than their resistance to change. All right, so a few more tips to share with you. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, and friends, it's 12:58. So I know Matthew, and it's very important to S&PS to be on time here. Last bits of info here. If you want to be a pro troublemaker, and if you want to grow your team's positive change-making abilities, when you communicate, use a 7 by 7 by 7 formula. Here's what that means. 7 messages, 7 times, 7 channels. I bet you do a great job of that with your external stakeholders. Do you do an effective job of that with your internal stakeholders? Use the 90-day sprint, which is an agile tool to help people stay focused on more short-term goals right now, because too many things in our external environment is changing too rapidly. Sometimes we just need to focus on a quarter at a time, a quarter at a time. My opinion is that we should not be creating strategic plans right now. We should be creating 2-year disaster recovery plans. And then make sure you offer coaching and training, EAP services, telemental health to help people build their resilience skills for this long-term disaster recovery. So you will receive an email from me with an opportunity to get those tools if you're interested. If you're not, that is a-okay, but I do want to share those with you if they will be helpful. And so I'm going to pause there. Matthew, any questions that have come up? And as Matthew is reading those off and I'm answering those, I would love to hear from you in the chat. What was most valuable? What was most useful for you today?
Yep. So, and let me just remind all of our attendees today, if you have any questions, please feel free to include those within the question box. And while we wait for those to come through, we did have one request. If you could reshare the quote from Sai that you mentioned previously within the slides, if you could leave that up on the screen for a little bit. We had a few folks that wanted to see that again. But in the meantime, we had a question that came through. Do you have any examples of change in your experience where leadership needed to be sold on change?
Oh, yes. Okay, so here's the magic, my friends, is most people think that change happens in organizations from the top down. The research is showing that most successful change initiatives actually start at the mid-level leader. So you all on the call, you hold the magic here. So a lot of folks that I work with are mid-level leaders. I just want to share that tidbit. Give me just a hot second to think about an example as I go back to this other slide. So I had a mid-level leader that I worked with. She's on the partner track at an accounting firm. And she kept feeling the pressure to bill more, bill more, bill more. And all the feedback that she was getting was, you're not working enough, you're not working hard enough. And she's like, I don't understand. Like, I work all of the time. I take some days off when I want to be with my family, but what is happening? And so what we did is we use this feedback as an opportunity to really understand what's not going on. And what I discovered was that what had been communicated to me about her expectations for her job in terms of billable hours, non-billable hours, how to spend her time, wasn't ever communicated to her. And so she lost the understanding of what the priorities were of her job. And so in this scenario, the change that she was able to implement for the entire organization actually was I had revealed to her, I was like, okay, there's a disconnect in information here. Here's what I'm hearing. Have you ever heard that? She's like, no. And I know this firm because I coach multiple leaders, so I just have probably broader context in the firm than even she does. What she was able to do and the change that she was able to bring about, just because she sat down with her lead partner and said, okay, now I understand the disconnect. Now I understand this is where you need me to focus my time. How can we bring some of the reports to broader staff so they also understand it? And so just by sitting down and having a conversation with her boss to acknowledge the disconnect in information, to acknowledge the disconnect in expectations, she opened the door to helping the entire firm better understand the expectations and some of the reports that were going out. Because what the firm's leadership was doing was just sending out reports every month, and people would open them up and physically look at them and not understand why, close them down and delete the email. And the leadership team was frustrated that no one was making any changes. They didn't understand that they weren't communicating what they needed to communicate to. So this example is, she opened up the conversation, but just by saying, oh, now I understand the disconnect. So she gave a healthy dose of reality to them. She made a request that they change their behavior, and they did. So I know that's overly simplistic, but oftentimes that's what I find is why change isn't happening, is because folks are operating on two very different sets of expectations. If you want to dig into change management process, my favorite process, and there's lots out there, is John Cotter's, and he has the 8 steps to change management. I did an entire series on it on the Hot Mess Hotline podcast, which you can go to hotmesshotline.com. And the first season is all about the 8 steps to change management if you'd like to listen to it. And his book is an excellent resource as well.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. And I know we're a few minutes over, but we have
Yep.
a good amount of questions in regards to the 7x7x7 communication structure. So if you could
Yep.
you please repeat that 7x7x7, and then also
Yes.
what counts as what counts as a channel?
Channel. Okay. So yeah, 7x7x7 is a communication tool. 7 channels, 7 messages, 7 times. In an internal perspective, I consider channels things like email, Slack channel, meetings. If you're together physically and you have one of those large format TVs where you share corporate messages, one-on-one conversations. So you should be doing one-on-ones with your direct reports once a week. That's a channel. So think through what are the ways that you communicate with your people. That's probably a channel. It could be an all staff gathering. And then you've got to repeat it 7 times. Y'all are in marketing, you know this, but we forget to apply it to our people. We've got to repeat the message 7 times on that channel. Don't do the math on
Great.
7x7x7. You'll overwhelm yourself, trust me. Just do it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. It looks like that was the last questions that came through.
Okay.
So as we wrap up, did you have any additional comments or any final comments you wanted to include?
Yeah, I would just say, if you're interested in staying in touch, I would love to stay in touch and help you through this. Here's my email. If you have any specific questions, you have the recording. And then also I'll send you the opportunity to download the tools that I mentioned, 7x7x7, 90-day sprint, and then also what it means to teach resilience to your people to help them get through it. So that invitation, my door is open. But yeah, hope this was of value to you, and would love your feedback.
Great. Well, let me say on behalf of SMPS, thank you so much to our presenter, Stefanie Krievins, and
Yep.
to all of today's participants. Following today's meetup, you will receive a link to complete a brief survey on this session. Your feedback is very important to us here at SMPS HQ as we plan out our future programs. So thank you to everyone again for joining. You may now disconnect.